It sits in silence, gazing endlessly across the sands of time. The Great Sphinx of Giza, a monument that has stood for thousands of years, yet its origins remain one of the greatest enigmas of ancient Egypt. How old is it really? Could history have it all wrong? Today, we unravel the mystery of the Sphinx. According to mainstream Egyptology, the Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khafre, the ruler of the 4th dynasty. This conclusion is based on carvings, proximity to Khafre's pyramid, and stylistic comparisons. However, there is one major problem. There are no inscriptions anywhere on the Sphinx stating who built it. No hieroglyphs, no ancient records, nothing. In a civilization that inscribed almost everything, why would such an iconic monument be left nameless? This mystery has led some researchers to question whether the Sphinx is far older than we've been told. Enter John Anthony West, an independent researcher who noticed something strange. The body of the Sphinx isn't just weathered, it's deeply eroded in a way that suggests prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. But here's the catch: Egypt has been an arid desert for over 5,000 years. West's theory? The Sphinx must have been carved long before Pharaoh Khafre, possibly over 10,000 years ago, when Egypt had a wetter climate. A radical idea, but it gets even more interesting. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch took John Anthony West's ideas a step further. He conducted a detailed study of the Sphinx's erosion patterns, comparing them to other weathered rock formations around the world. His conclusion? The deep, rounded grooves found in the body of the Sphinx were not caused by mere wind and sand, but by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The last time Egypt experienced that kind of wet climate was over 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, long before Pharaoh Khafre's reign. This means the Sphinx must have already been standing, eroding under heavy rains, thousands of years before the pyramids were even built. Schoch's conclusions shook the academic world. But instead of being embraced, his findings were met with resistance from mainstream Egyptologists, who insisted the Sphinx couldn't possibly be that old. Some countered that the erosion could have been caused by underground water or other natural effects. But Schoch stood firm, arguing that similar weathering is only found in rock formations that have endured constant, prolonged rainfall. And there's another strange clue. The head of the Sphinx is far less eroded than the body. Could this mean the original head was recarved at some point? Some even speculate that the Sphinx once had the face of a lion, later reshaped into a pharaoh's image. If true, it raises the question, what did the Sphinx originally look like? And who built it? But who could have built it? This is where Graham Hancock's theories come in.
They identified a very large geometrical chamber, about 15 feet beneath the forepaws of the Sphinx. I think there's a lot more remains to be discovered under the Giza Plateau. He said that the Hall of Records of Atlantis lay beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx. Could say that the ancient Egyptians themselves had a sufficiently advanced knowledge of precession to be able to visualize the skies of 8,000 years previously. That would be a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But then we're confronted with the problem of the Sphinx. I mentioned that lion-bodied monument. That lion monument that I believe stood there 12,500 years ago, looking at the rising sun when it was housed by the constellation of Leo. That lion monument has been subjected to thousands of years of erosion. And I want to pay tribute to the brilliant work of two individuals. The late, great John Anthony West, dear friend of mine, the first to raise the possibility that the Great Sphinx had been subjected to some kind of water weathering, and that creates a problem in itself, because 4,500 years ago, the Giza Plateau was as dry and as waterless as it is today. And then Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University. And kudos to Robert Schoch for putting his reputation as an established academic on the line and looking at the geology of that site and coming to the conclusion and publishing the conclusion that the Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall. Not a flood, but precipitation, rainfall coming from above, selectively hollowing out the softer areas of rock and leaving the harder areas of rock in place. And it's that precipitation-induced weathering that you see more in the trench around the Great Sphinx now than you see on the Sphinx itself, because the Sphinx has been constantly restored. This is one of the anomalies. We know that some of the restoration blocks were put there in the time of the pharaoh who's supposed to have been responsible for the Sphinx, and not a single document tells us that he was responsible. That's just another Egyptological fantasy, actually. The Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of heavy rainfall, and that's the only time you find that heavy rainfall on the Giza Plateau is the Younger Dryas. Between roughly 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. You certainly didn't find it 4,500 years ago when the Sphinx is supposed to have been made. So we're looking at a very old monument, very heavily eroded. In the time of the ancient Egyptians, they looked at that massive leonine head, which was so damaged and so eroded, almost unrecognizable, and they recarved what was left of it into the head of a human being, wearing the Nemes headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh. That is a recarving of a much more ancient monument. That's a restoration work that was done on it. And we don't know which pharaoh it's supposed to represent. Egyptologists like to think that it represents Khafre. There's no compelling evidence for that whatsoever. So a lion-bodied monument, once a lion-headed monument, that now takes the form of the lion-bodied Great Sphinx with a recarved human head that's way out of proportion to the scale of the rest of the body of that 270-foot-long monument.
The debate continues. Mainstream scholars dismiss the alternative theories, but the evidence of water erosion and missing records raise serious questions. Was the Sphinx really built by Khafre, or is it a marker from a lost civilization? What do you think? Could history be hiding the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the unexplained zone.